Hello. So today we are going to be looking at the quadrilateral family tree. So in the first place, what is a quadrilateral? A quadrilateral is a figure with four sides. Therefore, all the figures we are going to be looking at today, or the shapes that we're going to be looking at today, the parallelogram, the rectangle, the square, the rhombus, the kite, and the trapezoid are all figures with four sides. The defining attribute, meaning the mandatory, can't be this type of quadrilateral if it doesn't have of a parallelogram, is that the parallelogram must have opposite parallel sides. We know that the sides of a parallelogram are congruent because these two sides are cut by this side's transversal. So basically this side is acting as a transversal cutting these two lines. This transversal forms alternate interior angles that are congruent. And then these angles corresponding and also congruent. And the same for this side. Because the alternate interior angles of the angles formed by the transversal are congruent, therefore we know that these lines must be parallel. Because the alternate interior angles are congruent, we also know that the transversals of both of these sides must be parallel because they have the same slope and measurement. Therefore, under this branch, I'm going to put all quadrilaterals that have parallel sides. Their sides are parallel for the same reasons that I explained for the parallelogram. So under the parallelogram, I have a rectangle. The defining attribute of a rectangle is that it is a quadrilateral with all right angles. Over here, we can see that the rectangle has all right angles. The defining attribute of a rhombus is that it is a quadrilateral with all congruent sides. And connected to both of these shapes, I have a square. The defining attribute of a square is that it is a quadrilateral that has equilateral sides and equiangular angles. So how do we know that a square is a parallelogram? We know that a quadrilateral's interior angles must be 360 degrees. Therefore, if a square is equiangular, then each pair of angles is 90 degrees. And an angle is 90 degrees is a right angle. This means that every adjacent side must be perpendicular to each other. So this side is perpendicular to this side and forms a right angle. Thus, the opposite sides must be parallel. So now why are this rectangle and rhombus connected to the square? As we said, all of a square's angles are right angles. Therefore, a square is a rectangle. A rectangle can sometimes be a square when all of its sides are congruent. However, because a defining attribute of a rectangle is not that it has to be equilateral, then a rectangle isn't always a square. I have also connected a rhombus to the square. The defining attribute of a rhombus is that it must be a quadrilateral with all four sides congruent. Because a square is equilateral, it is always a rhombus because it always has equal sides as well. However, a rhombus can sometimes be a square when all of its angles are right angles. But because having right angles is not a defining attribute of a rhombus, it is not always a square. But now how are a rectangle and a rhombus related? A rhombus can sometimes be a rectangle when its angles are right angles. But because having right angles is not a defining attribute of a rhombus, it is not always a rectangle. And a rectangle can be a rhombus when all of its sides are congruent. However, because a defining attribute of a rectangle is not equilateral, it is not always a rhombus. In both of these cases, the only way that they can be one another, a rhombus, a rectangle, and a rectangle is a rhombus, is if the rhombus is a square or the rectangle is a square. I have also drawn a line from the kite to a rhombus. The defining attribute of a kite is that the two pairs of equal adjacent sides are equal to each other. A kite is a rhombus because in a rhombus, all adjacent sides are congruent. Moreover, a square is a kite because, like a rhombus, it has all congruent adjacent sides. However, a kite cannot be a square or a rhombus because it does not meet the defining attributes of either shapes. A kite is not under the umbrella of a parallelogram because the sides of a kite do not have to be parallel. Therefore, they do not fall under the parallelogram tree. Unconnected to any of the shapes is the trapezoid. The trapezoid's defining attribute is that it must have exactly one pair of parallel sides. We can see over here that this trapezoid has one pair of parallel sides as marked, and this trapezoid over here has one pair of parallel sides as marked. It is not under the parallelogram family tree because all opposite sides in a parallelogram must be parallel. The kite is related to the rhombus, although the rhombus has parallel sides as well, because the rhombus has all the defining attributes of a kite. However, the trapezoid does not have any of the defining attributes of any parallelogram. So to kind of circle back around, the quadrilateral family tree's figures are all related because of the fact that they are all quadrilaterals, meaning that they are figures with 4 sides.